Welcome to another episode of Search News You Can Use with me, Dr. Marie Haynes. I'm recording this episode on Wednesday, May 22nd of 2019, and we've got a bunch of things to discuss in the world of SEO and digital marketing. We're going to talk about a really interesting article that came out on Search Engine Journal just recently about how Google's algorithms work, and there's a lot of theory in this article, but there's some very interesting stuff that might help to explain why some sites can see massive hits when an algorithm update happens. And so I'm going to give you my thoughts on that. We'll talk about the updated quality raters guidelines. Most of you listening to this probably know that our team here are really, really big fans of Google's quality raters guidelines. And so whenever they update, we pay close attention to that. So I'll tell you what has changed and what we can potentially take advantage of or what we should be heading towards in terms of our marketing efforts, for the next year or so. And we'll talk about another Google indexing bug and other Google news like that. So let's start off with algorithm updates. We thought that perhaps there was a very minor algorithm update on May 14th of 2019. When we looked at our Google Analytics for all of the clients and past clients that we have access to, we noticed that a few of our clients were seeing changes on May 14th. They're very minor changes, and many of them could be attributed to seasonality. A lot of our clients actually saw some slight decreases at this time. A couple of our clients saw slight increases. I don't think it's enough to call a significant update at this point. And who knows, maybe it is related to some of the indexing bugs that we'll talk about in a minute. But I don't really think that May 14th was a big update. That said, when we did our algorithm update checks, that was yesterday, so May 21st, it kind of looked like May 20th was shaping up to be maybe an algorithm update. So it's too soon. We really need a good several days of traffic patterns in order to say whether an update happened. And often in some cases, we need even a few weeks to fully assess the severity of it. I feel, though, like we've had more requests for help, and I don't know if that's just because I've been doing more speaking and more public engagements, or whether there actually is something going on with the algorithms. So, this is not, the last time we had a real significant update was March 12th of 2019, and I think probably we'll get some updates coming up soon. So let's actually talk about the fact that Google updated their quality raters guidelines. So as soon as this happened, I had people all over the place sending me tweets and emails saying, hey, I'm sure you want to know the quality raters guidelines updated. So we actually have a process in place where we check that, regularly. And my team's on the quality raters guidelines several times a day. So sure enough, when my team came in, Cassie said to me, hey, the quality raters guidelines have updated. She sent me this message on Slack, and as always happens, when something big happens with Google, I was traveling. So I actually went to Montreal this weekend to see Pink in concert. If any of you are trying to decide whether to go see Pink, it was absolutely the best show I've ever seen. Fantastic show. But anyway, so I had the whole train ride to look at what's changed, and my team went back and forth with Diff Checker and looking at what's new. And there were a lot of changes. So sometimes when Google changes the quality raters guidelines, what they do is they, maybe just change the odd little bit of wording. And there were some wording changes that may not be significant. For example, in one place, the quality raters are now instructed to wear proper headphones. And I had wondered if maybe this could be meaning that the quality raters are going to start assessing voice search results as well. I think probably, though, it's more to test whether websites are working properly. One of the things that's in the guidelines is the raters are told to look at whether tools and widgets and quizzes and things like that are actually functioning on the website. And so probably it's not a big significant thing, but it's important to, note maybe. And so we'll see if anything comes of that. One of the very interesting changes that we noted was that Google added the word interstitials to a couple of places. So interstitials, I think most of you know this, but those are full page or almost full screen ads that appear on mobile. So if you land from search on a website and immediately you have a full page pop up That's essentially an ad, or even I think Google recognizes the legal ones that are necessary. So if you're, an adult website or something that requires an age check, those probably are fine if you're required to have them by law. But if you have an interstitial that's essentially an ad and people have to close the interstitial before they can see your actual content, then this can be something that can actually cause you to not rank properly. And Glenn Gabe has pointed this out in the past, that when the interstitial algorithm first came out, it was supposed to make it so that sites showing interstitials really had a hard time ranking, and that the algorithm really doesn't have much teeth. And so we see a lot of sites that are still getting away with using full page interstitials, and it doesn't seem to have affected their ranking ability. I am betting that that's going to change, and I think Google probably added these words to the Quality Raters guidelines because it's something they want to assess more deeply. And then the last thing that I think is really significant, we have a whole article on this. If you go to our blog, mariehaynes.com/blog, you'll find an article on everything that we felt was significant that changed. I could probably do a whole podcast episode just on this alone. Well, the most important thing, though, is that a lot of the mentions of EAT were actually changed to, say, page quality. Now, they haven't completely gotten rid of EAT, and in fact, EAT is on more pages in the guideline now than it was in the last edition. But they've really changed a lot of the things to, say, page quality rather than EAT. So I had a few people tweet at me and say, oh no, does this mean EAT is done? And no, I think there's two possible reasons why this change happened. One could be that it may just be more clarification for the quality raters. If they're trying to assess pages, EAT is primarily for the quality of the author of the page, the expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness of the author, and also the brand or the business itself. And so that doesn't leave a lot of room for understanding which pages actually are more helpful than others. So one of the examples that was given was as an example of a high quality page would be the Marriott's own website. So if you were trying to book a hotel room, or you're trying to get information about the Marriott hotel in a particular city, then Google wants to rank the Marriott's own site properly. They want to rank it well. Now let's say I decided I wanted to start a website to teach people all about tips for travel. And there's tons of stuff. There's really a lot of opportunity here. I'll tell you, when I go to, I travel a lot, and I think there's a lot of things that I try to find. I try to find, what is the quality of the beds at this hotel? Where's the best place to get a good room? And I know TripAdvisor does some stuff where, they have the top tips that people will say, hey, if you get a room on the west side of the hotel, it's more quiet, or it has a better view, something like that. So let's say I created a website that has all of this information, and it's way more valuable. And I have a whole page on what the checkout times are for every single Marriott. So let's say you wanted to find out what the checkout time was, and my document actually answers questions better than the Marriott's. Who do you think is going to rank better? And, I think a lot of SEOs would say, well, my document should rank better because it's more helpful. But really, Google's algorithms recognize that the Marriott is really the best place to go for that information. They're the official website. If something changes, I'm not necessarily going to know that. And unless I have insane authority as being known as the world's leading expert on Marriott hotels, then probably I'm not going to be able to outrank that content. But we think that Google is maybe going to soften up EAT requirements for content that doesn't necessarily have to be YMYL. And so, maybe if you're selling a product that doesn't cost hundreds or thousands of dollars, and you're an expert in the product, but you don't really have, any schooling, or you have informal expertise, it seems like Google is going to be trying to measure that a little bit better. I still think they are. I think that, if you were an expert in something that doesn't have schooling, well, for example, I'm considered an expert in SEO. I have never gone to university for SEO. I've taken some online courses, but nothing too crazy, right? So I don't have formal letters behind my name that say, yes, she's well known as an SEO. But I have mentions and recommendations from other people who are recognized as experts in SEO. And so that can happen for pretty much any field, that you need other people online to be recognizing you as a subject matter expert. So I think that in the months to come, I mean, almost every time Google updates the quality raters guidelines, there's some type of a big algorithm update that's going to be happening that reflects these changes. One of my team, Dylan, actually had a thought that I wonder if the March 12th update had to do with Google's being better able to assess page quality as a separate thing to EAT. And there is, it really made sense why he said that, because if we look at, we have some clients where we did site quality reviews for these sites, and we said, look, you are never, these were sites that were competing against WebMD and Mayo Clinic, and we said, you're never going to have the EAT that the authors at WebMD have, or that the medical reviewers have at Mayo Clinic. And we really don't think that EAT is going to improve for this site. And some of these sites actually saw significant improvements in rankings. They haven't recovered to fully where they were before they were hit with algorithm updates. But on March 12th, some of these sites that we felt were never going to have good EAT actually saw significant bumps up in traffic. So we think what's happening is Google maybe got better at recognizing that, even though this person doesn't have a medical degree, they do have some expertise that we can trust in this matter. So whether that happened on March 12th, I think that's a possibility, or whether there's going to be a future update to reward on-page quality and maybe put a little bit less emphasis on EAT for queries that are not strongly YMYL, I think that that's a possibility. So this is a lot of speculation, and we'll see what happens in the months to come, and we'll look at future algorithm updates through this sort of filter of what's changed in the quality raters guidelines. Let's get on to a bit more news now. So I mentioned there's another indexing bug. This bug is affecting Google News, and it may be fixed by the time you're listening to this podcast. So this morning, again, May 22nd, Barry Schwartz noticed that news sites will have their content indexed almost immediately if you're an authoritative news site, and it was taking hours for content to get indexed. So that's not good. If there's breaking news, Google would not be able to show it. We don't want news to take 3 to 4 hours to appear. I'm not sure what the issue was, but I do think that Google is working on it, and it's probably fixed by now. I would really love to know what's causing all these. When we talked to Martin Splitt he came to have lunch with my team and a few other local SEOs, Martin from Google, and he said that really the de-indexing bug was just a series of things that, one thing happened in the code and that changed this and then that changed this, and a bunch of unfortunate events happened. And so I still think Google's changing their code base or something, that cause all of these bugs. Who knows? Maybe it's a scale thing too. I can't imagine how many trillions of pages Google has to deal with. So maybe it's maybe they have servers melting down somewhere. I don't know. Let's see what else we'll talk about here. There's also a bug still that's affecting the ability to see your cache for your site. We talked about this last week, that if you search for cache, CACHE, and then your website or a particular page, you can see what Google's got cached for your site. So Danny Sullivan commented on this earlier this week, and he said, we're aware of this and expect it will be corrected soon. He also said it has no impact on indexing, as Google has fresher versions indexed. So I think the point here is, if your cache pages are not right, you probably can ignore that, although I wouldn't ignore it 100%, because sometimes that can be a sign that something's going wrong with Google's ability to render a site. But it's good to know that there is some type of a bug there. This seems like it's big news, and nobody was really talking about it. It looks like Google is changing how they show image referrers in Google Analytics. So previously, if you had visitors from image search, you would see in Google Analytics that it would come from, I think it's images.google.com would be the referrer. And that's changed. So Google updated a blog post. This was the post was published in July of last year. AJ Khan pointed this out. And here's the part that was added. It says, update. After testing and further consideration, we have determined that the best place to measure query and click traffic from Google Images is in the Search Console Performance Report. Accordingly, we will continue to use https://www.google.com or the appropriate ccTLD, so google.ca or .co.uk, as the referrer URL for all traffic from Google Images, and will not be providing a Google Images specific referrer URL such as images.google.com. So that's important if you care about image search. So what Google's saying is they want us to be using Search Console to determine how our images are performing rather than Google Analytics. That's what I interpret from that. So again, if you're trying to figure out what's going on with your image search and your Google Analytics is showing a massive drop in referral traffic from Google Images, it may not be a problem. It may just be that it's being reported in a slightly different way. Let's talk a little bit about howTo schema. There's a bit of confusion. There's a new type of schema that you can implement now, and in the newsletter, we've linked to a guide that Brody Clark created to tell you how to implement howTo schema. And Casey Marquis, who does a lot of work with recipe sites, was asking, can we use howTo schema to mark up recipes? It totally makes sense to me, right? His example was how to roast a chicken. Well, you'd think you'd want steps and, howTo schema. And then Daniel Weisberg from Google replied that howTo schema is not for recipes, and you should be using recipe markup only. So, be known that that's what has to be happening if you have a recipe site. Another interesting thing that I have not noticed before, Earl Grey tweeted at John Mueller asking why in Search Console, actually he asked Webmaster Tools. I have a funny story. I'm going to come back to that. Why he asked in Webmaster Tools is certain links are being shown as a 404, but he had marked them as a 410. So let's talk about the difference there. For those of you who do not know. This is actually one of the first mistakes I made in an article that I wrote. I remember I wrote an article years ago about the fact that if you 404 a link, you're basically doing the same as removing a link, or if you 404 the page that a link target lands on. And I totally neglected to talk about 410s. And so 404 means you're telling Google this page no longer exists, but it could come back at some point. 410 is saying this page is gone and it's never coming back. Essentially, I think Google treats them the same. I think they may perhaps recrawl a 404 page a little more frequently, and then eventually they figure out there's no point in us crawling all this all the time because it's gone. So John Mueller's response was, yeah, I think this is a simplification we do in that particular output. And then he said, also, what status code do we have to show to make you stop saying Webmaster Tools? I have to laugh because I have a notification in my calendar that says revisit this tweet. And it's a tweet from, I think, 4 years ago where I was talking with Rand Fishkin and I said, I bet you it takes me 4 years to stop saying Webmaster Tools instead of Search Console. I think probably it took about 2.5. And for the most part, we say Search Console now, but I'd be interested in knowing how many of you cannot get away from saying Webmaster Tools. Okay, moving on. Google talks indexing images. Oh, yes. Okay, so I think most of us know this, but just in case somebody doesn't, if you have a page that's blocked by either no index tag or an X-Robots no index tag, and that page has images, will putting the no index tag on that page cause the images also to stay out of Google's index? So think about that. I'm going to wait before I give you my answer because okay, so the answer here, that was my pause. The answer is that if the page is no indexed, the images are also no indexed. But it made me think for a minute. So anything that's on a no indexed page, as long as that's the only page it's on, really should not get into Google's index. I think ultimately, if you wanted to make sure that Google was not crawling those images, you might consider putting a robots block on them as well, if you want to keep them out of search. Let's see here. Also important to know that for the URL inspection tool in Search Console, formerly known as Webmaster Tools, it's not meant for images. And so I've seen lately a few people trying to do URL inspection on just images, and I don't think you're going to get any helpful results from that. There's been an update to the Moz Keyword Explorer, and this looks pretty cool. So according to Brittany Muller, you can now sort and filter keywords by SERP features. And so you can, if you're looking up certain keywords, to determine what the difficulty is, what the volume is, the estimated volume for how much traffic you're going to get for ranking for these, you can sort them now to show just featured snippets, just image results, knowledge cards, site links, a bunch of things like that. So that looks kind of interesting. I think that's probably something we're going to play around with more in the months to come. Let's talk a little bit again about hidden content on mobile. And I feel like I've talked about this so many times that if you have, let's say you have an accordion or something that's hidden behind tabs, and John Mueller has said in the past that with mobile first indexing, that should not cause you ranking problems. So here's something that we didn't know. One of the things that we do when we're doing site review for page quality, and we're trying to determine whether Google is actually seeing the content that's behind tabs. So let's say you had like a bunch of reviews that were super helpful and you put them behind a review tab on a product page. And then, we'd click on that tab and take text from the review, put it in quotes and search for it on Google. And if we saw that Google had recognized, oh yeah, these words are bolded on this particular page, then we can say, yeah, Google's seeing it. We can't say 100% whether they're giving it full weight. And a lot of the time what we would see is that Google could recognize what page it was on, but it wasn't bolding those words. And we would interpret that to mean that the text was given lesser importance. That's probably an assumption that we made. And what John Mueller is saying is that I'll read the quote here from Glenn Gabe, who's quoting him from the Google Help Hangout. For content hidden in tabs on mobile pages for mobile first indexing, Google will use that for indexing and ranking, but will not show that in the snippets in the search results. If Google shows it in the snippet, the user should be able to see it on load. That's kind of interesting, right? So I still maintain that if you have content that is potentially going to help the quality of your page, it should not be hidden behind tabs. I think when you hide stuff behind tabs, sometimes it adds a better user experience, but it makes it challenging for search engines to see that you actually have unique and helpful content on a page. And often user-generated content like reviews is the stuff that can separate your page from all of the hundreds or thousands of other people that are selling the same product as you. Here's an interesting thing that was brought up by Ryan Jones. Ryan said that he noticed that a lot of ad networks lately are using JavaScript widgets that insert stuff into the head of your document, the head of your HTML, basically. And when this happens, that can break the head of your document, and it can make it so that certain things are not working. So, for example, if there was a bunch of JavaScript in the head, it might make it so that Google doesn't see a canonical tag that is below that JavaScript. So if you have some weird things happening where you can't get pages indexed, or even if pages are, struggling to rank and it feels like they're really, really being suppressed for some reason, I would take a look at the code that's in the head of your document and see, is there script? If there's any sort of a script that's before important information in the head, that needs to go. Really, there shouldn't be scripts in the head, as far as I understand. So same thing goes for iframes as well. You really should keep those out of the head of your document. Let's see, a couple more things. This is interesting. Mike Blumenthal noted that in one of the searches he did, the place on the maps listing that normally says Google Posts had been changed to updates. So Google may be changing the word posts to updates. I think that makes sense because I think a lot of people still are confused about Google Plus, even though that doesn't exist. And when I talked about Google Posts, they were thinking I was talking about a Google Plus post. Updates make sense. I don't think it changes anything in what we do for SEO, but hopefully they will keep this as updates rather than posts. Joy Hawkins pointed out that Google My Business Insights does not include data from voice searches. So that's good to know. I do think that voice searches are included in Search Console keywords because every now and then we'll see a keyword that's, okay, Google keyword. And I just opened my phone saying that. When that happens, I think John Mueller has said this in the past, that what happens there is somebody has actually said it twice. So if you say, okay, G, and then nothing happens, and then you say it again, okay, G, whatever my search is, Google's actually heard both of them. And so I think in Search Console, you can see your voice queries there, but in Google My Business Insights, they're not in there. Hopefully, we will get that in the future. Another really good tip that Joy Hawkins pointed out is if you are asking your own questions on your Google My Business knowledge graph or knowledge panel, then you don't want to put a line break in there because it won't actually show. So she gave an example of somebody where the question was, hi, dot, and then a line break, and then the rest of the question was on a new line. The way that gets displayed in the SERPs, people will not see the question, and same with your answers. So if you want to have something show in the search results, you need to not have line breaks in there. Speaking of Joy, I'm super excited to see that she has updated her training for local SEO. And when Joy first started doing this, gosh, I think it was a couple years ago now, and I was first starting to hire people. And so we had lots of discussion on marketing and how to just provide a good SEO service because there's so much bad SEO advice out there. And so Joy's somebody that I really, really trust in terms of good SEO advice. And if you do any local SEO, you probably have looked at her guide in the past, and it was fairly expensive. So the price has come down significantly. Joy's not asking me to say any of this. I don't get any sort of kickback. I just think it's really, really good. And I would recommend that any of you who do any local SEO work should consider purchasing this guide. So let's talk lastly about this very interesting article by Jason Barnard in Search Engine Journal, and it was called How Google Search Ranking Works, Darwinism in Search. So we debated on whether to include this in the newsletter because there is a lot of theory and guessing in the article. But I still think it was a really good article to write. And this was an article that was sparked from a conversation that Jason and several other SEOs had with Gary Ish at, I think it was SMS in Sydney, Australia. I've been in some of these conversations, not that particular one, but often, if you can get a Google employee talking, they'll tell you a lot of stuff. And I'm assuming, usually when Gary tells me stuff, he follows it up with, please don't write about this. So obviously Jason didn't have that disclosure saying, please don't write about this. But so here's the thing, the way I understand it. And please know, I'm very careful to say when I'm talking something theoretical, and this is a theory. So don't go saying, this is how Marie Haynes says that Google works. It's just a theory here. So what Jason was writing about in this conversation was that Google has many, many ranking factors. He listed 7 possible ones. I think probably the list is much more massive. And so let's say that freshness is a ranking factor, and the number of times the keyword is on the page is a ranking factor, and links are a ranking factor, and all these different things. Each of those gets a score, and then that score, this is according to Gary, that score is multiplied together to get a final score. So let's say you're lacking in an area. Now, Jason's article didn't talk about EAT, but I think this is how EAT plays into effect, because we've seen so many sites that have seen massive hits with algorithm updates. So let's say Google changed something in their algorithms to make it so that they found a better way to assess trust. And for whatever reason, they've determined that, you're a medical site and you've got untrustworthy information on here. And so for whatever reason, we don't trust you. So instead of giving you a score out of, I don't know what the scores go to, let's say they go to like 10. Instead of giving you a 10, because we lack trust, we're going to give you a decimal score. So maybe they give you like a 0.2. Well, then instead of multiplying everything together, everything gets multiplied by 0.2, which means that it's going to be really challenging for this page to rank unless there aren't better options. And so what Jason was saying was, how do we deal with this? What do we do with this information? Is he's saying, rather than working on, every little thing that could be improving quality, figure out what it is that's the main issue. What is it? If you feel like you're being suppressed, there's got to be something. And in our opinion, a lot of the time it's a trust issue. If you go to mariehaynes.com/trust, you'll find the article that I wrote on the September 27th, 2018 update. And it talks a lot about the different things that Google has said could be measured as a sign of trust or lack of trust. So, I think this whole system is probably way more complicated than we know, but it makes sense to me that if you are seeing a sudden huge drop in rankings, then the things you want to look for are, first, did you make any changes on the site? I can't tell you how many times I've had people come to me saying, like, we think we were hit by Panda or by some big update, and oh, by the way, we just did a site redesign last week. Like, usually, if you've changed major things on the site, if you changed your URLs, you've been fooling around with your robots.txt, take a look to make sure that you haven't broken something on your site, okay? And especially if you have a massive site that has a lot of things that need to work together properly, the very first thing you want to look at with a traffic drop is whether you've made changes. And then we look at things like, has there been a manual action in the manual actions viewer? You should get an email whenever you get a manual action, but some people have emails from Google blocked for whatever reason. I've seen it happen. So, and then if, start looking at things like my algorithm update, if you go to, again, mariehaynes.com/algo, ALGO, you'll get to my post where we list every date that we think is an algorithm update. And so if your drop happens in coincident timing with a day where we say there was an update, then start looking at that. When we say, oh, we think this update had to do with trust, or in some cases we noticed that all of the sites that saw changes were sites we'd identified as having unnatural link issues, then oh, if I dropped it this time, I should be looking at my links. Now, I want to caution people because, again, we've seen lots of things where people have said, oh, there was an algorithm update on March 12th and my traffic dropped around that same time. It must be due to the update. It's not always, but it can be. And so I think this article was really interesting. There's a link in the newsletter to where to read it. And I think it's worthwhile for everybody in SEO to just read this. And, I know we're speculating on how Google works, and some could argue that that's a waste of time. But I think it's really important if you're dealing with sites that have seen traffic drops. So that's all we've got for this week. I want to thank you. I mentioned last week that we're starting to take on a few clients for what we call light site quality reviews. And quite a few of you reached out to us. We've signed up a few clients that we're going to be testing this out for. We still have a couple of more spaces before we're probably going to close the option of light reviews until we assess how well it works for our team. We want to be able to review a website and see if we can figure out why has traffic dropped, or why can you not achieve the rankings that you think you should be able to achieve. And our full review takes us a good 2 weeks to complete it, whereas the light review we spend, you have one of my team members spend 2 full days working on your site and giving out as much as we can, but it's nowhere near as extensive as our full review. So if you're interested at all in having our light review done, then reach out to us, help@mariehaynes.com, and we'll get you a quote for that. And similarly, we're seeing a bit of an uptick in requests for help with manual actions for unnatural links. I don't know if that means, again, that Google is giving out more of these manual actions, or whether, we've just beefed up our sales page to make it. I hadn't changed it since 2012, I think. So that's really bad, right? I need to update my website more often. We've got changes in the works. We've got a lot of changes coming for the company that I'm pretty excited about. But anyways, I'm babbling on here. If you have a manual action, and in the past, we've only ever done full, we remove it, or we haven't done partial consulting, but we are offering that now because now I've got a whole team of people that are really good at this stuff. So if you want to hire us for hourly work to help get rid of a manual action, again, reach out to us and we can talk about making that happen. So let's hope that we don't have too crazy a week. But again, it wouldn't surprise me if a big algorithm update is on the horizon, especially with these changes to the quality raters guidelines that sort of hint that Google is going to be working on improving their understanding of page quality. So with all of that, I hope you have a fantastic week, and I wish you the best of luck with your rankings.